Why have humans spent their entire lives searching for the one? And here's a bigger question. Was love the kind where you fall for someone and just know they're right for you? Was that always the way things worked? What if I told you that the idea of marrying for love, the thing we treat as totally normal and obvious, is actually one of the newest inventions in all of human history? And what if the soulmate fantasy you've carried your whole life never really existed for most of human history at all? Right now, we're going to follow 5 dramatic chapters of how humans searched for a partner across thousands of years. This isn't a love story, it's the story of survival, power, social systems, and the slow, messy evolution of what it means to be with someone. And by the end, you're going to look at your own search for a partner in a completely different way. Let's start here. For most of human history, finding a partner had nothing to do with personal happiness. It was about survival. It was about building a system strong enough to keep a community alive through another brutal winter. The idea that you marry someone because you love them, because your heart says yes, that's a relatively recent shift in human thinking. For thousands of years before that, something else entirely was driving the decision. So let's go back, way back, to the earliest human communities. Small groups of people, living close together, depending on each other for everything: food, safety, protection. In that world, pairing up wasn't a personal choice, it was a collective strategy. Multiple anthropological studies on early human societies show that marriage wasn't primarily about the two people involved. It was a tool for managing relationships between groups, a way to build alliances, a way to say, without words, we're not your enemy. Pairing decisions were made based on what the group needed, not what the individual felt. Today, that might sound cold, but here's the thing. In that context, it was the most rational choice available. A leader who could forge the right bonds with a neighboring group didn't just gain a family connection, he gained protection, food access, a fighting chance against whatever came next. The French anthropologist Claude Lévi-Strauss called this the principle of exchange. Marriage, in early societies, was one of the most powerful social technologies humans had. It regulated relationships between groups. It created trust where there was none. And in that world, individual feelings were simply not part of the equation. In that time, community need came first. Personal emotion came second. Always. Some of these practices persisted well into the 20th century. Researchers studying communities in parts of the world still found the same patterns. In some societies, special marriage customs existed specifically to solve problems of family lineage and inheritance. Unique institutions were documented across multiple cultures, all designed to keep the group intact above everything else. This wasn't exotic or strange. It was evidence of something deeply human. In many societies throughout history, a union was seen less as a personal bond and more as a question of community survival and continuity. And the individual was a part of the answer to that question, not the center of it. Then everything changed. Humans started farming, and farming changed the game completely. Surplus food meant property. Property meant inheritance, and inheritance meant something that had never really mattered before. Who exactly continues your line? Suddenly, the question wasn't just can we survive together, it became how do we protect and pass on what we built. Marriage shifted from a survival alliance into something more like a political and economic merger between families. In feudal societies, a marriage between powerful families functioned a lot like what we'd now call a strategic business deal. The Habsburg dynasty in Europe is maybe the clearest example of this. Their unofficial motto was basically let others fight wars. We'll get what we want through marriage. One emperor managed to expand his empire's reach into Bohemia and Hungary without a single battle, by strategically placing his descendants into the right royal families. Early Korean history shows the same pattern. During the founding of the Goryeo dynasty, marriage was a central political instrument for consolidating power across regional ruling families. These unions were built on political interest, not personal feeling. But this wasn't just a royal thing. Go down to the peasant level, the working families, the merchants, and you'd find the same logic playing out on a smaller scale. When two families discussed a marriage, They weren't asking, do these two people make each other happy? They were asking, what does this family bring to the table? What's the land situation? Any debts? The actual people getting married were often the quietest ones in the room. In aristocratic circles, family interest almost always took precedence over individual preference. Marriages decided by political necessity rather than personal choice were completely normal. Across every social class, personal feelings, personal dreams, personal futures, all of it had to fold quietly under the weight of something bigger: the family name, the family line, the family plan. So when did love actually enter the picture? Here's what a lot of people get wrong. They assume love, the deep personal kind, where you choose someone because of how they make you feel, has always been part of marriage. It hasn't. Many historians and sociologists argue that our modern understanding of love as the primary reason to get married was significantly amplified during the Industrial Revolution and the broader rise of modern individualism. It wasn't there before, at least not in the way we know it today. And then the late 18th and early 19th centuries arrived. Industrialization started pulling young people off farms and into cities, and that changed everything about how people related to each other. For the first time, a young woman working in a textile factory could earn her own wages. She could survive, at least partially, outside the framework of a family-arranged marriage. Young people were in cities, away from their parents, surrounded by strangers, and in that environment, something new became possible: a kind of personal connection, made by choice, based on feeling. The space for individual emotional choice in relationships expanded dramatically, in a way it simply hadn't before. And then literature poured fuel on the fire. Writers across Europe began exploring personal emotion, individual longing, the idea that love, your love, the one you feel in your chest, actually matters. Novels, poems, stories, all told people your feelings are real, your desires are valid. Romance, as a concept for how love could look and feel, began spreading through popular culture in a form that looked a lot like what we recognize today. But the walls didn't come down overnight. Parental disapproval, class differences, economic reality. Love didn't mean you could actually be with whoever you chose. So this era's love stories were always beautiful and always a little tragic. And then came the 20th century, and a new kind of force entered the room. Mass media began reshaping what people expected from love. Hollywood started pumping out movies in the 1920s, and on the screen, a new kind of person appeared. Perfect looks, perfect words, a breathtaking proposal, a flawless ending. This was the era when idealized love began to hit people at massive scale, quietly shifting what they expected from real-life relationships. Media gave people a benchmark for love that lived in the imagination, and that benchmark started shaping how people experienced their actual relationships. The 1950s American TV commercial version of family life became a global myth. Handsome husband, beautiful wife, perfect kids, clean house in the suburbs. This image spread across the world like a template. Marriage should look like this, but real life kept drifting further from that image. Women entered the workforce. Divorce rates climbed. People searched for the perfect partner they'd been promised by the screen, and kept finding that real humans didn't quite measure up. The gap between expectation and reality started to hurt. In South Korea, this tension became especially visible through the 1990s and 2000s. TV dramas every week served up perfect love stories. Meanwhile, real young people were staring down crushing job markets and impossible housing costs, quietly reconsidering whether marriage even made sense. Matchmaking services boomed, and the first question on a blind date wasn't "What do you love?" It was "So, what do you do?" Romance and resume review existing in the exact same moment. Recent surveys show that younger generations are rethinking marriage at a striking rate. Positive attitudes toward marriage have dropped significantly, and openness to non-traditional relationships, like cohabitation without marriage or different kinds of family structures, has increased sharply. The 20th century handed people a sky-high vision of love and then stood back and watched as expectations collided with reality. So where does that leave us now? Because here's what's wild about the moment we're currently living in. The very definition of partner is being rewritten in real time. How people find each other has changed. What being together even means has changed. This isn't just a cultural trend, it's a signal that the entire framework humans have used to find partners for thousands of years is being renegotiated. Dating apps let you swipe through millions of faces with your thumb, more options than any human being in history has ever had access to, and yet, more people than ever are talking about feeling genuinely lonely. That's not a coincidence. Families look different now. Couples who never legally marry but spend 20 years together. People choosing to live solo, and living fully. Communities of people who take care of each other. Outside of traditional family structures. Some people see all of this as a weakening of human connection. Others see it as a new form of connection emerging. Both perspectives are worth sitting with. And here's what all 5 of these chapters, taken together, actually tell us. The thousands of years humans spent searching for a partner, it was never really a romantic story. It was a survival story, a political story, a social story. It was humans, in every era, building the kind of togetherness that their specific moment in history required. Survival alliances, family mergers, industrial-era romance, media-fed fantasy, and now, something we're still figuring out. None of these were wrong. Each one was the most rational answer available to the people living it. And that realization, it reframes everything about your own search. When you can't find the right person, and you're starting to feel worn down by it. When you go back and forth on whether marriage is even right for you. When you catch yourself comparing your life to someone else's. That confusion isn't your personal failure. It's shared, widely shared. Many people are sitting with the exact same questions right now, in the exact same moment in history. So let me ask you something. In your life, what does partner actually mean to you? Is it security? Is it love? The romantic kind? Is it something you've inherited from expectations around you? Or is it something you're still working out? Maybe finding your own honest answer to that question is the most important thing you can do right now.
We're still walking the road called Together. From the earliest communities where people leaned on each other just to make it through the cold, to the men and women who built families around duty and lineage, to the factory. Workers who caught each other's eyes and felt something new, to the generations who chased love stories they saw on a screen, to you, quietly scrolling through a phone, trying to figure out what kind of together actually fits your life. Nobody knows where this road ends. Nobody knows what partnership will look like on the other side of everything changing. But one thing has stayed true across every single era. Humans have never stopped looking, and they won't. Because in the end, the search itself might be the most human thing about us.